When I was 8 years old, my family moved into the house I grew up in. It wasn't an old house and no one had died in it, and it didn't even feel creepy. It was just an average suburban house in your average southern suburbs. The way the house was set up, when you came in the front door, there was a hallway with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom to the right. The large living room was in front of you, with half a wall separating it from the dining room to the left, and the kitchen was on the other side of the dining room. Where the kitchen and living room met, there was another small hallway, the master bedroom, a bedroom that was used as an office, a bathroom, and then the breakfast nook leading to a laundry and utility area at the end of the kitchen. My room was to the right of the front door and down the hallway past the bathroom, with the other bedroom on this hallway used for storage, mostly as I was my mother's only child, and my half-brother and sister didn't live with us and rarely came to visit. The first time anything really happened in the house, I was about 9, and I'd lost my last tooth. Still being a kid, of course, the tooth fairy was expected, so when I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure standing in the middle of my room, I assumed it was the tooth fairy. It was bald and only about 3 or 4 feet tall, about the size of an average child, standing completely still in the middle of my room. I remember my parents telling me that if I was awake, the tooth fairy wouldn't leave me any money, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. When I got up the next morning, I excitedly told my parents that I'd seen the tooth fairy the night before. I described what I'd seen, but they told me it was just a dream. For the next several years after that, I continued seeing and hearing minor things around the house. When I was home alone, cabinet doors would open and close. I'd hear dishes being moved around in the kitchen or catch movement out of the corner of my eye. The most common occurrence was often at night I'd wake up and see a young woman hovering over my bed. She was dressed like the Rosie the Riveter character from the old posters from the 1940s, with the red and white bandana around her hair and a denim shirt. When I would see her, she'd stare at me for a few minutes and then slowly float over my body and out through the wall behind me. I was never afraid of her, though. When I was about 12, my parents divorced, and it was just me and my mother living in the house. By the time I was in my late teens, my mother was rarely home, and my house became the hangout for me and my friends. Most nights, everyone gathering together to play Dungeons and Dragons or something similar after work. One night we were hanging out, but didn't want to play, so I pulled out a Ouija board I'd picked up at the local toy store a few weeks before, wanting to try it out. We sat in my room to play with the lights out and the door closed, and it went pretty normally, nothing crazy happening for the most part. The only strange thing that happened was at one point we asked something to show itself, and at that point we heard the front door open and close, and heavy footsteps come down the hall towards my room. The handle of my door started to turn, and one of the guys jumped up and locked the door before it could open. We didn't hear anything else, no footsteps moving away from the door or anything. And after a little while, we turned on the light and opened the door to see if my mother had come home unexpectedly. The house was empty, and the front door locked. We decided we'd had enough of that game at that point, and everyone went home. A few weeks later, we were hanging out at my house again, this time playing Dungeons and Dragons. Though one of the girls that usually came had to work late and had classes in the morning, so she said she wouldn't be coming. While we were sitting in the living room to play, at around 2 in the morning, suddenly we heard footsteps run across my wooden front porch. It sounded like someone very short or a small child running quickly. Everyone in the room heard it, and we had a conversation as to if our friend had changed her mind and had just arrived, as she was very short, and it made more sense than a child running through the neighborhood at that time of night. When she never came into the house, we all got up to look, and there was no one outside, and her car wasn't in the yard. Her boyfriend who was with us gave her a call, and verified that it wasn't her and she'd just arrived home on the other side of town and was headed to bed. Around this time, the activity in the house picked up. I saw shadow figures with red eyes often in the living and dining room of the house, and heard footsteps and other noises at all hours of the day or night. I started waking up in my room to see hooded figures standing near my window and door. It was around this time my half-brother, who I was close to, passed away. It was sudden, and I hadn't seen him in years as he'd gotten into drugs, and my mother had decided to keep me away from him because she didn't want him to be a bad influence on me. After that, I'd wake up hearing his voice saying my name in the middle of the night often. On a whim one night, I sat down and typed out a letter to him on my computer that was in my bedroom since I was home alone that night and was bored. Now, this computer was hooked up to an old dot matrix printer, one of the really loud kinds that makes all kinds of racket when it's running. After I wrote the letter, I felt silly for it and deleted it without saving or printing it and shut down the computer before I went to bed. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up and my bed was soaking wet. At first I thought my puppy had peed on the bed because he was too small to get down, even though he was housebroken and I'd taken him out just before bed. I got up to let him outside and change my bed sheets when I realized the wet was just water, and it was more than a tiny puppy could have made. On my way to take my blankets to the laundry room, I passed the bathroom in my hallway and noticed the light was on, even though I'd turned off all the lights before bed. There, sitting on the counter, was a pitcher from the kitchen with the inside still wet. When I was really young, my brother used to wake my sister and I up by throwing water on us because it made me laugh. When I got back into my room and started making my bed, I noticed a piece of paper laying on top of my printer. It was the letter that I'd written to him, never saved or printed. The computer was still shut down and the printer was off, but it had been printed out, torn off the printer, and laid on top as if someone had read it. Normal things like this continued for a few years when I lived there on and off, before things turned dark shortly before I moved out of the house for good. The hooded figures began to appear more often. I woke up one night with the feeling that I was being stared at, only to roll over and see what looked like a rotting corpse a few inches from my face. Another night I woke up to a hooded man standing at the foot of my bed, with my bedroom door open when it had been closed before. He held up his hand and a ball of blue light appeared in his palm, which he threw at my face. He and the ball disappeared just before it hit me, but the room was so cold that I could see my breath on a normally hot southern summer night. When I was in my early 20s, after I moved out for good, I had one last experience in the house. My mother hadn't been to the house in months and was preparing to sell it. I had told one of my cousins about the things that had happened there through the years. One night he decided that he was bored, and he and a friend of his would pick me up to go ghost hunting in the house while it was empty. Each of us had a camera and a voice recorder. We set a recorder in my old bedroom and spent an hour or two wandering around the house taking pictures. When we got done, we came back to my room and sat to listen to the recording and discuss all of the nothing that we had found. On the recording, we could hear our voices moving from room to room and talking about how my cousin's friend's camera had a sexy shutter sound and the fact that my camera stopped working almost as soon as we walked in the door. About 20 minutes into the recording, when we could hear all three of our voices echoing from the other side of the house, a deep voice that sounded like it was right up against the microphone said,
"Get the out!"
We immediately obliged. I found out a few years later that my mom actually had several experiences in that house. She would wake up to find an older man in his 50s or 60s looking through her closet or seeing him just wandering around the house. When she'd say anything or get his attention, he'd turn around and look at her and then vanish. She always thought she was just dreaming or something, but with everything I saw over the years at that house, I can't help but to think it was something else. Please, someone help us. We don't know what to do. It's getting so bad, and in the 20 years I've lived here, this is by far the worst. Both my parents grew up in haunted houses, and of course my siblings and I have grown up in haunted houses as well. At first, my parents thought my brothers just had an imaginary friend in their closet named Joe. One of my brothers woke up screaming in the middle of the night, and I was a baby, so I don't remember, but my parents have told me about it. My parents ran in there, and he had blood all over his sheets and 3 very long cuts down his back. My brothers had bunk beds, and my other brother was on the bottom. My parents said he was so pale, and he wouldn't say a word. Things calmed down for a really long time, until I was about 10. I had one of my friends staying over, and we were staying up really late playing games and doing what little girls do. We started to hear scratching coming from the outside of my door, and I had a cat, so I thought it was her. I went to open it, but no one was there, so we just shrugged it off. Then it started again, and the doorknob started to jiggle, and it slowly opened, and there was a dark figure standing there. It looked like it was out of breath, and its shoulders were going up and down. Then it lunged at us, and we screamed, and my parents came running. Nothing or nobody was in the house. My friend never stayed over again, and stopped being my friend shortly after. 9 years later, just little things were happening, nothing too scary. My boyfriend, now husband, went off to basic training, and I still lived with my parents. I was only 19. I had my dog Zeus, and he was sleeping on my bed with me. He was a yellow lab. It was about 6:30 in the morning, and I had to be up at 8:30 for work. He woke me up by growling, and then I heard a weird voice in my ear, speaking a language I didn't understand. When I started to open my eyes, it started growling in my ear. I opened my eyes fast and my door slammed. My dog was standing over me with his hair standing up, looking like he was about to attack something. Another time, everyone had gone to work and I heard banging coming from my parents' room. I got Zeus off me, I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room. Cabinets were opening and closing fast and things were getting thrown everywhere around the room, and it wouldn't stop. I slammed the door shut and ran out. My dog was now running around the house barking and growling, and then he started running into my parents' door. I said f*** it, grabbed my work clothes, got my dog, and ran the hell out of there. I dropped my dog off at my friend's and went to work early. When I got home, my parents' room was destroyed. My mother was crying and my dad was pissed. I told them everything. We decided not to talk about it again and went on with the rest of the day. My brother still lived with my parents as well. That night, my door kept opening and closing, and I kept hearing running in the hallway, so I thought it was him. I slipped on my slippers and stomped into his room. I was going to yell at him to knock off his stupid shit, but when I opened the door, he was snoring. I woke him up and made him promise it wasn't him. He told me to leave his door open to see if he sees anything. I'm halfway down the hallway, and my brother yelled at me to run back to my room and to not look back, but of course, I turned around, and as I turned around, I see a large black figure standing in his doorway, staring at me. It had large red eyes, just staring at me. I froze and started to whimper. My brother, being the protective big brother, came charging, telling the thing to leave me alone, and when he got to it, it disappeared. My brother ran to me and led me to my room, and slept on the floor that night so he could stay with me. I didn't sleep. Now, a year later, I'm 20, and my husband is away for the army at the moment, and we're waiting for plumbing to get done in our new house, so I'm still staying with my parents. Last night, we had a bad rainstorm. I woke up to the growling again, but I couldn't move. Out of the corner of my eye, there was the figure with the red eyes again, just staring at me. Thunder started, and it opened its mouth so wide it could fit my whole head inside. It had huge sharp teeth and a long skinny tongue. It started to scream, and my ears started to ring. I wanted to cover them, but I couldn't. My dog was half growling and half whining at it. My parents came running in, covering their ears, but stopped mid-run when they saw the thing. My dad came running to me anyway and picked me up and carried me to his room with my dog following. Zeus had his back to us so he could face the thing and never took his eyes off the figure until it was out of sight. I was finally able to move, and I started crying and shaking uncontrollably. My brother was still living at home as well, and he had his girlfriend over that night. We heard her scream, and then she started banging on the door, so my dad opened it, and she came in running and crying and shaking. We started to ask where Mike, my brother, was. Before she could answer, my brother came out of his room on his hands and feet with black eyes, just staring at us. We all froze, and none of us knew what to do. My brother then popped his neck and started running for us. My dad slammed the door shut and locked it. My brother started to run against it. My mom was screaming for him to get the hell out of her house and just kept repeating this while throwing things and stomping, and then things went quiet. My dad opened the door and my brother was passed out on the floor with his nose bleeding. When my brother woke up, we told him everything. He didn't remember anything. He just remembered hearing screaming, and then it all went black. He told us all sorry and then stayed quiet for the rest of the night. Nobody slept, and we all called into work to try and figure something out. Now it's the next night, and it's 11 at night. We are hearing scratching and growling through the house. We can't do this again. Please, help.
Okay, so this feels really weird to say, but a quick disclaimer, when this happened, I was sober, not asleep, and totally in my right mind. I was 18 at the time. It was late August, at around 11 p.m., but I live in Ireland, so it was still pretty much freezing outside. My parents had went to see my uncle over in Scotland because he was sick, and my older sister was staying at a friend's, so I was alone. I wasn't scared though, because although I believed in ghosts, I never thought anything this creepy could happen to me. I'd been watching Mean Girls with Lupin, my husky, sitting on my lap, and when the TV just turned off. No lights were on at the time, so I just thought it was the television being annoying. I wasn't scared, but then Lupin started to freak out. He jumped up and started to bite and pull at my sleeve, trying to tug me out of the room. I tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having it, so I just went with it, and he led me to the kitchen at the back of the house. That was when there was a knock on the door. This was really weird. I live in the countryside, and my closest neighbors are about a half a mile down the road, but I guess I wasn't really thinking. I went to leave the kitchen, and Lupin jumped in front of me and started to growl. This was scary. Lupin is the chillest dog ever. He barely even barks, let alone growls, and never at me. I tried speaking loudly to him and pushed by him, but he just started pulling on my sleeve, trying to pull me back into the kitchen. I pushed on, thinking he was just freaked out by the television going out. When I got to the door, I could hear him start whimpering, and as I turned to look at him, I heard a voice coming from outside the door. "Please, miss, we need your help." I really didn't think about it at the time. I just heard a kid's voice, and felt that I had to help. But my door is solid wood. They wouldn't have known I was a girl. I opened the door, and there were two kids that I didn't know, standing shoulder to shoulder. Both were girls, one about 14 or 15, and the other was a lot younger, maybe 7 or 8. But I couldn't see very well because it was dark, and I didn't have the lights on. From what I could see, they were wearing normal clothes, but as I looked down, I saw that they didn't have any shoes on. And it was freezing. I was about to tell them to come in, but then Lupin jumped past me and started growling and barking. He looked possessed, and I was really freaked out. I started to pull him back by the collar and put him in the living room, locking the door behind me. I apologized, but then I stopped. The girls didn't look startled at all. They just stood there not moving. The older of the two said, "Please, let us in, miss. We need to call our mother." This was weird because I couldn't tell where she was from. She didn't have my accent, but it was kind of neutral, and no one I know calls their mom mother. It just seemed odd. I asked her why they didn't have shoes on, and they both just looked at each other and said, "Please, let us in. We need to call our mother." I felt so uneasy. My chest was tight, and I was almost shaking with fear, and I didn't know why. It was then that I finally did something smart. There was a light switch near the door. I hit it, and the light behind me came on, and the world seemed to stop. They had no whites to their eyes, and no iris. Their eyes were just black. I couldn't move. Then, the younger one said, "Let us in, miss." I just slammed the door and locked it, hyperventilating. Lupin was banging against the living room door, trying to be let out, so I ran to it and opened it, and he just threw himself on me, whimpering. The kids were still at the door. The younger one was shouting, "Let us in! We need you to let us in!" I screamed and told them to leave, and they just kept banging. I ran upstairs. I looked out the top window, and the kids had moved to the bottom of the driveway and were looking right at me. I tried to scream, but no noise came out. I ducked down and looked up, maybe 10 seconds later, but they were gone. This scared me even more, not knowing where they were. I called my sister and made her come home. I never saw them again, and haven't slept properly since. It's been 2 years. I only found out recently that black-eyed kids are a thing, and I'm not sure if it gives me closure or makes it even more terrifying.